Welcome to a short video review of Axis and Allies Revised. This is the end of a solo game I've played. As you can see, it turned out to be an Allied victory with the Allies, in this case the Americans, taking Japan, and Germany had been taken way prior to that. So I have to admit that Axis and Allies Revised is actually my favorite version of the game. Why is that? Well, one of the reasons is that in this version of the game, you actually get to defend China. Strangely enough, in the later iterations of the game, Global Anniversary, even though China consists of many more territories, they seem impossible to hold, whereas in reality, in history, Japan never managed to conquer China. And in this case, and of course it's an abstraction because, China is actually controlled by the US player. But the US can and often will build a factory there, and you can really slow down the Japanese. And if you're a little bit lucky with some help from the Russians in the beginning, you can really stop them. And that's something I really, really like about Revised. And as far as I know, that's the only game in which you can actually manage to do that. Perhaps Classic as well. But it's been such a long time since I last played that one that I'm actually not sure. But if you happen to know whether it's possible to successfully defend China there, please let me know. What else do I like? Well, I like the color scheme. I know that that's very controversial and that many Axis and Allies players actually do not like the color scheme, but what I like about it is, it's just really clear where territories begin and end. For example, it's really obvious where West Russia is, Belarusia, and if you take Axis and Allies 1942, for example, which is more of a topographic map, especially here, the border is very difficult to see, especially in artificial light, and so it's just very easily visible where everything is. Something else I really like about this game is that it comes with a number of national advantages rather than national objectives. I actually use a printed version of the internet instead of the ones that actually come in the book because some of them are a bit unbalanced and these are better. Since then, I've actually come across several other ones on the internet which I like even more. So I'm planning on making my own house rule version. Many of these I will actually keep, and it's really fun. The Germans get to build an Atlantic wall, for instance, and U-boat interdiction, so that it's actually worthwhile for the Germans. Well, perhaps it's not the best example, but it is actually possible to wage economic warfare against the Allies using U-boats, which is, of course, in reality what they were used for more than anything else. Much more than an attack weapon against enemy naval units. Well, you can read for yourself what it does, but it actually inflicts 1 IPC of damage on both the UK and US economy for each U-boat that you have on the board. There are other versions of it that they actually have to be in the Atlantic rather than anywhere on the board. But it just makes it a lot more interesting. Something else, the Luftwaffe dive bomber, representing the Stuka, which actually comes with the game. You get to attack on a 5 the first round of combat if the enemy doesn't have any fighters themselves. I've seen modifications of that rule as well, which again I prefer, that for each fighter you have on the board, each matching tank gets to attack on a 4, I believe. Sometimes even that both the fighter and the tank attack on a 4. 5 is somewhat overpowered, I think, and you don't need to do much for it. And in the other case, you still need to pair them up. The British have got some great ones. A Joint Strike, which represents D-Day, for instance. In the British turn, you basically just take half a turn, you buy your units and everything, and you place them, but you don't actually make any combat or non-combat moves, and then the Americans get to use the British forces on their turn, which makes for a combined attack. Japan has got some really nice ones. They get to transport one infantry for each destroyer they have. They have a kamikaze strike, night fighting. In this version, actually, the battleships are a bit too powerful to my liking, and I've seen some modifications of those rules as well, which make them even better. Dug-in defenders, which makes the Allies fight really hard for the Japanese-controlled islands. And again, there's a modification of that, which is actually better. That in this version, if you get destroyed by shore bombardment, you don't get to fire back. And actually, the modification for dug-in defenders is that you do still get to fire back on a 3. So that's great as well. The US has got some great ones. Island bases, which basically lets you ignore the sea zone around an island, and you can right away fly to the next sea zone. Chinese divisions, which is really fantastic and really helps with what I told you before. It really helps you defend China, because after each US turn you get to place one infantry for free in China. That includes Kwantung if the Allies control it. Well, these are really fantastic ways to make the game, especially in the sense that each nation has its own, historically accurate to some extent, advantages, and one of the main drawbacks, of course, of the national objectives, which you have in Revised and Anniversary or in Global, is that those games are already slanted towards the Axis, and those national advantages make it even more so, or much more so even, because it's much easier for the Axis to retain and to obtain and to retain those advantages, and it's much harder for the Allies. And these national advantages in Revised do not have that. What else do I like about the game? Well, what I like about the game is that the board is relatively small. What's good about that? Of course, it's fantastic to have this huge map and everything. But yeah, you basically need your own garage or man cave or whatever to be able to keep it set up. And this game is, really small in the sense that it really fits on a kitchen table even, I suppose. And so there's nothing wrong with that, really. I mean, it's great to play this monster game, and I do every once in a while. But it's also great to just play something that's more manageable and everything. Speaking of that, I also think that the territories have been very well chosen, from where you can actually reach with each unit. And I don't really think I've forgotten anything really important. I think this is, in many ways, the most fun version of the game, and I also think it's the most balanced version of the game. In this case, it was a big Allied victory, but the Axis certainly do stand a chance as well, but they need a little bit of luck, and I probably made some big mistakes in my playthrough as well with the Axis in the beginning, but they certainly didn't have the luck they needed at certain moments, and which is what basically caused them to lose. By the way, I'm using pieces from Axis and Allies 1942 here, the second edition, so the game doesn't come with these particular units. And I'm using some factories from Classic as well as from Revised itself. So in case you're wondering about that, they don't actually come with this game. I don't have many bad things to say about Revised, a couple of rule changes that have happened since then is that, for instance, transports are taken last as casualties. Well, I suppose that's a good thing, that this game could have had as well. But I actually do like it that they get to fire back on a 1. I mean, I don't suppose they would have been entirely defenseless, and at this scale, they probably would have had some escorts which would be able to defend the transports. Yeah, and since then there have been some other rules updates and modifications and everything, but all things considered, this is my favorite version of Axis and Allies. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.